Turning now to the developing uprisings across the Middle East. We have been watching a brutal crackdown by riot police in Bahrain overnight. They fired tear gas and rubber bullets on peaceful protesters who were sleeping in the capital's central square. And in Libya, protesters are using Facebook and Twitter, social media, to call for a day of anger today. Violent protest against Muammar Gaddafi left 2 dead yesterday. And in Yemen, protesters have been protesting for about a week now. One died in the last 24 hours, one protester. Joining us this morning to discuss more about the protests that are spreading across the Middle East is Aziz Abu Sarah, the Director of Middle East Projects at the Center for World Religions, Diplomacy and Conflict Resolution at George Mason University, and who has been a guest on our show before. We thank you for coming back.
Thank you for having me again.
Let's start with what's happened in the 6 or so days since Hosni Mubarak resigned in Egypt. Have things gone as you would expect that they would with military rule there now?
Yes, actually, the military has moved in the same steps we expected. They ended the parliament, they dissolved the parliament, they suspended the constitution. They are planning on reforming the constitution and then have it for a referendum. Elections will happen again in a few months, probably. So there are a lot of steps in Egypt that actually are leading against some expectations toward democracy.
Let me ask you, the latest on Hosni Mubarak's health, his condition. Have you heard anything regarding that? Yeah,
there have been a lot of reports about him being depressed. I mean, he's been ruling the country for 30 years. He's 82 years old. His health already has been bad in the last few years. He's been to Germany many times, have gone through many surgeries in Germany. So I think his health has gone much worse after what happened. He expected to die as the president of Egypt, expected to pass the leadership to his son, Jamal Mubarak. And so these events, he didn't expect this to happen, even as things were going on. Reports are saying now that his son Jamal was the one really in charge, and he didn't expect to be out of power this quick.
Can we expect to see him again? We haven't seen him since the speech that he gave the Thursday before he stepped down the next day.
It's very unlikely that he will come public again. I think he feels ashamed of what happened. He lost power. He was one of the most powerful dictators in the world, and losing power in 18 days have put him in a place where he sees himself humiliated.
When we want to talk about some other hotspots now, the domino effect, if you will, but you just returned from spending 3 weeks in this part of the world. Is there anything that you gleaned just from being there, what's on the Arab street, if you will, when you were there, or did it seem like things were business as usual for you?
No, I think there's a lot of frustrations in many Arab countries, and there are some unique things to different Arab countries that protests are happening in today, but there's something similar in most of these countries. A lot of anger about corruption. You're talking about the price food that has gone up. 80% of what people spend in developing country goes to food, and so people are watching a few people ruling minority getting richer and richer, watching corruption, and that's making a lot of people angry, especially when their freedom is very limited.
Let's talk about some of the hot spots now. Let's start with Bahrain. We've been reporting on the protest, or the crackdown on the protesters last evening. Now word that several are dead, 4 killed, in fact. What do you make of what's happening there?
Well, Bahrain has its own unique situation. It's a very small country, 1.2 million people. It's the ruling minority, actually 30% Sunnis, and family that rules Bahrain, the Al Khalifa family, is from the 30%. 70% are Shiites. There's a lot of corruption. The 70% are ignored when it comes to housing, when it comes to employment. There's a lot of unemployment within the Shiites majority. They're not represented in the right way in the parliament. So there's a lot of frustration. This is not the first time they actually come out and protest. Bahrain is a rich country compared to Egypt, compared to a lot of Tunisia, but these groups that have not felt freedom, have not been given freedom, they feel after what happened in Egypt that it's time for them to stand up and to ask for what's theirs.
Quickly want to talk also about Yemen, or let's talk about Libya, actually, with what's going on against Muammar Gaddafi. This is a name that we've recognized for a long time,
yes,
as ruling with an iron fist. Can you talk about that and what we can expect there?
Well, The reason where I think in Libya there is a good possibility that things could happen and Muammar Gaddafi could go down is 80% of the country live in cities. And when you have a huge amount of people living in cities, means protests can have a lot of people coming out. Again, the same thing. One of the rich, when you look at the GDP in Libya, you have one of the richest countries in the Arab world. But when you look at unemployment, you have over 20% of people unemployed, mainly the young people. It's the same thing in most of the Arab countries. What's interesting is both Libya, Yemen, Bahrain, they all dealing with the protests the same way that the Egyptians dealt with it. And you would have assumed that they would have learned a lesson from what happened in Egypt, but not. They are using power, they're using crackdown and hoping that through force they will be able to stop these protests.
We look forward to when you come back again, talk about the still developing story. We appreciate you being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Steve, over to you.